Are you one of Dr. Cartwright's students? Is that what it is?
I was. I graduated in May of this year. So.
Oh, okay, congratulations.
Oh, where did you go to school, Ilse?
I went to University of San Diego, USD.
Oh, yes. We've had several interns, right, Christina?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
It's always nice when Derek recommends people. That makes it easy for us. You know, we'd love to take, you know, whenever he recommends somebody, of course, we're gonna, you know, check that person out. So yeah, welcome. We're excited to have you here.
You'll hear from me a lot, Ilse, because I do 2 lectures a month, and Samantha's been so wonderful arranging those PowerPoints for me, and also, of course, hosting. So you will hear from me quite a bit.
Don't worry, I'll be around, Karen.
Okay.
Don't worry, I'm still helping out. Okay, so we are ready to go. So thank you so much, Karen. And I'll start letting people in now. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. Give us a couple of minutes while we let a couple more people in, but thank you so much for joining us. All right, perfect. Well, again, welcome to this virtual tour of the Timken Museum. We're so excited to have everyone with us here this morning. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. Please keep yourselves muted throughout today's presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat function over Zoom in order to ask your question, and we'd be happy to address those at the end. If you're joining us over Facebook Live, welcome to you as well. You can do the same by using the comment section there on Facebook in order to ask your question, and we'll be monitoring that as well, and we'll be happy to address those questions at the end as well. Lastly, this meeting is being recorded and streamed, as I mentioned. So if you would like to watch this presentation again or watch any previous presentations put on by the Timken Museum, please check out our social media channels, our YouTube, our Facebook channel, our Facebook page rather, and you can see any of those previous presentations put up there. So without further ado, thank you so much for again joining us this morning. I'm so excited to have our docent today, Karen, be presenting on the Venetian Renaissance, which is such a rich topic. We were just talking earlier. So many things to talk about and so many exciting artwork. So I'm so excited to have Karen with us this morning. Thank you so much for doing this, Karen. I'll go ahead and turn things over to you.
Thank you so much, Samantha. Yes, the Venetian Renaissance is quite unique. We are going to be focusing on the golden age of Venice during the Cinquecento, the 1500s. Because of its geographical uniqueness, Venice really developed quite a very specialized form of Renaissance art. So let's talk a little bit about the area of Venice. It's in the northeastern part of Italy. There are something like 177 canals and 120 small islands. Venice is a lagoon. It's set in a lagoon and it's off of the Adriatic. So it had quite a maritime history. Now, backing up a little bit, let's talk about the Renaissance in general. What are the principles of the Renaissance? So the Renaissance develops, of course, in these areas like Rome and Florence, Siena, and Venice. And they really are addressing the issues of humanism, a little bit of a move away from the strict confines of the Catholic Church. The Renaissance artists and writers are interested in Greek and Roman mythology. They're interested in their heritage of Greco-Roman art that can be seen throughout Europe, parts of Europe. And so it is a very unique time. Who is sponsoring these artists? Well, in places like Florence and Rome, we have, of course, the Vatican and the Catholic Church, but we also have families like the Medicis. Venice is a little different. Venice is controlled by a doge, D-O-G-E, and we're going to actually look at a portrait of a very famous doge. The doge was overseen by a council of 10. So it wasn't just the doge making political and cultural ideas stand, but he also had an overseeing body of people that were elected every year. So we have this doge, and we have a very rich economy in Venice. Now, Venice was a great publishing center in the Cinquecento in the 1500s, but it wasn't so much a center of humanism, but it was a center for the development of the arts because we had a very high-level merchant class and the aristocracy. If you go to Venice today, I was there 2 years ago, you will see this rich heritage, the palazzos, the churches, the piazza. So much of Venice was at the kind of higher level of aristocratic development. Now we are going to concentrate just on painting because our collection at the Timken is painting, and we could talk for hours about the architecture of Venice and sculpture, but we're going to, of course, concentrate on painting. Now, what we are looking at is Sacred and Profane Love by the great master of the Cinquecento, and that was Titian. Titian became probably the most important Venetian artist, but there's a whole history of who he was connected to, who he learned from: Bellini, Giorgione. Sometimes they even finished each other's paintings. And then later on we have Veronese, and others who we were going to talk about. So let's look at the uniqueness of Venice, the cultural, the political, the artistic aspects of Venice that make it so profoundly beautiful. Now, Giovanni Bellini was the father of the Cinquecento Venetian art. And you can see that he was influenced by many early Renaissance artists, Piero della Francesca, for example, but he developed his unique style. Well, what is Venetian art? How is it different from art of, let's say, Rome and Florence? Venice was just as important. However, sadly, Vasari, for example, the great art historian who documented the Renaissance, High Renaissance, and into Mannerism, he kind of overlooked Venice. And then he realized, wow, I'm making a mistake. I want to take a second look. But people from outside of Venice, foreign travelers, foreign artists, were captivated by the beauty. What is unique about Venetian art? Well, let's look at the color. The colors are radiant. The Venetian artists actually thought color should prevail over line. So we see this really beautiful saturated color. They use the Venetian artists a much more loosely woven canvas, so that allows for the saturation of color. They overglaze a lot, so you have this really rich, resonant color. There was this influence of almost like a poetic sensibility about these Venetian paintings. Very unique. If you were to put, for example, a Bellini, Giorgione, a Titian, Tintoretto, if you put them side by side, you would really see this resonating color and this very poetic sense. Now, what were the topics of Venetian painting? Well, of course, we have the Pietà here. So we have a lot of religious painting. We have very significant mythological painting and also portraiture. Now, again, the Venetians were not lockstep with the papal control. They had their own way of painting and doing things. They were a lot more independent. So you're going to see a much more influence with mythology and even erotic type paintings, which we are going to see with subsequent paintings. So let's talk a little bit about Bellini. Bellini came from a family of artists, but Giovanni, his father Jacopo, and his brother were instrumental in his learning about art and studying art, but Giovanni was the preeminent early Renaissance master in Venice. So let's just take a look a little bit. And of course, he was a teacher of Giorgione and the teacher of Titian. So there's this lineage of great artists. Now, let's look at the Pietà. The Pietà actually is the idea of pity. And we have this, and compassion, of course. So we have this magnificent Pietà where it's so sensitive. It's really poetic. And we have this, the body of Christ as he lies on the lap of his mother who is in mourning. And it is a very touching moment. And you see that she holds him and gently caresses him. And in the foreground, we have this marvelous field of flowers, white flowers. And we have some carryover here. Now we have the city behind us, which was supposed to be Jerusalem, judging from this archaic subject, but at the subject of antiquity, I really should say. But really, if we look closely, it does mimic in a Renaissance city-state. So he is kind of doing a composite of Venetian or high Renaissance architectural elements here, but we also have this beautiful pathway. But the scene of the Pietà just is filling the space. You can see the saturation of color in her blue robe, which she often wears, and also how the light falls on the dead Christ. You have to remember, like many Renaissance artists, and also in Northern Renaissance and in Italian Renaissance, we have this really big focus on light. Light, color, color over line. I want to go to the next image, and this is a really amazing painting. So this is the Doge Leonardo Loredan, and he was a Doge from 1501 to 1521. And during that time, so again, I remember the Doge is sort of the overseer, the aristocratic overseer of what happens in the city of Venice. And he's a member of the oligarchy, you know, the highborn, and he was voted on and he sort of controlled. Now, at the time that he was the Doge, Venice had a lot of issues going on because the Roman Catholic Church thought that Venice was a little too independent. So they were trying to kind of divide Venice from its power structure. I don't know if I ever mentioned this, but in the 14th century, Venice was probably the richest city in all of Europe. And again, because of its maritime location, vast trading, it had salt farming, so it had a lot of, and publishing. So there was a lot going on in Venice. So Doge Leonardo Loredan did oversee a time when Venice was a little disruptive, but we'll talk a little more specifically about his portrait. Bellini was a masterful portrait painter, although he didn't do a tremendous amount of portraits. This is a very distinct portrait. Now, the clothing the Doge wears is very unique to his particular station in life. We have this beaded garment front and this very elaborate, looks like it could be jacquard or satin. And then we have this very interesting cap, like a cone. And what it is a linen cap over, and they put this cone cap over. This is the sort of the symbol of the Doge. And so we also have the signature of the artist of Bellini right here. So he faces us with candor and strength, and which is very symbolic of his power. And again, even though he was the most powerful person in Venice at the time, he did have an overseeing body. Now, if you go to Venice, as I said, I was there 2 years ago, and of course, we actually have a magnificent painting of Venice, a Baroque painting of Venice. We will see that there is a piazza and a piazzetta, a little plaza, and then this magnificent Piazza San Marco, where the medieval St. Mark's Cathedral. We also have the right, if you're facing down, you have the Doge's Palace, which is today a magnificent museum. On the left, you have a library. So the Doge's Palace, which is obviously extant today and a magnificent museum, was where these Doges would reside. Now, this is an amazing painting by Bellini, and the Feast of the Gods. Now, Bellini also had Titian, one of his students, one of his prized students, finish or work on some of his paintings. Also, when we look at the work of Giorgione, who died very young from plague, we will also see many of his works were either attributed to Titian later or completed by Titian. So what is happening here? Okay, the Feast of the Gods, we have a mythological subject. So as I just showed you, we have Bellini doing a Pietà, highly religious subject. We have him doing a portrait. And now you can see this interest in Greek mythology. So we have 17 figures. We have Zeus represented here, and Apollo, Poseidon, and they're all gathering in this beautiful wooded area. The Venetian artists were very, very adept at painting landscape. They brought landscape into many of their paintings, and they were gifted at painting landscapes. But there was always this almost poetic sensibility about the landscape. It wasn't so straightforward. It wasn't that, quote, photographically real. It was more poetic. No, so what do we have here? This is kind of the nymphs and the satyrs feeding wine. We have the god Bacchus here, and he's adding some wine from the barrel. We have people, some of them already sleeping because they've consumed too much wine. And we also have some of them getting ready to imbibe. We have Sibelius, his donkey here, and he's kind of looking on the merriment. And we have the god of fertility, and Priapus, his name is. And Priapus, the god of fertility, was kind of a party guy, and he is trying to be a bad guy and lift up the skirt of this little fawn. And this fawn is sort of sound asleep from all the alcohol, and she's kind of unaware, but all the gods and satyrs and nymphs are laughing at him. Like, what are you doing? The other thing is, I do want to mention that this scene comes from Ovid. So it does come from the 6 books of Ovid. One of the chapters was called Fasti, and this happens to be taken from that. But just really quickly, so we have the satyr, half man, half goat. We have Sibelius, who one of the gods of, I also believe, fertility, if I'm not mistaken. And they're being laughed at. He is being laughed at for his little unfortunate attempt. And then again, we have these gods and goddesses. And so he shows his adeptness at completing figurative elements and this beautiful, magnificent, color-saturated, light-filled canvas. And we see the light sort of hazy chiaroscuro. We have the beautiful trees and birds and a bit of a landscape through the trees we can see. So this is based on literary form, and it shows the influence of mythological themes on these Venetian Renaissance artists. Now, one thing I do want to mention, and maybe I'll hold off and talk too much about it, but I do want to tell you that this is like the high Renaissance in other parts of Italy, but we also have about 1520, the emergence of mannerism. And mannerism is different because mannerism, Michelangelo practiced traditions of mannerism, Pontormo, Parmigianino, that's a little bit later in the Cinquecento, but there was a bit of an elongation of form, perspective is a little different, and you don't exactly see that here because mannerism really hasn't quite evolved, but there are a little bit of elements to it. But so let's just talk about this painting and talk a little bit about Giorgione. Giorgione was Venetian, just like Titian. Not all of the artists that we're going to talk about today were born actually in Venice. Some of them were born in the environs of Venice, but they came to Venice to do a lot of their work and schooling. Some of them actually traveled to Rome and painted for the court there and also for the papacy. So they did travel a bit, but we are, of course, centered in Venice. So Giorgione studied under Bellini. He was considered, along with Titian, to really be the founder of modern art. Because after Vasari, who initially kind of ignored the Venetian painters, he came back to look at the work of Giorgione and said, this is so, at that time, modern. It's so forward-thinking. So he is kind of thought to be, along with Leonardo da Vinci, really the founder of modern art. He also started a kind of a process of painting smaller, this is not one of them, smaller oils on canvas, and that would be sold to the aristocracy. So not only were the big palaces and churches filled with this Venetian art, but also smaller home paintings, a little bit like what was happening in Holland, a little bit like. So let's talk about this Castelfranco Madonna. This is what's called a sacra conversazione, a sacred conversation, the conversation between these three principles. So we have here, of course, St. Francis of Assisi, and then we have St. Nicaeus. Now, St. Nicaeus was considered at first to be, in this painting, St. George, who slayed the dragon. But Nicaeus was a martyr during the Fourth Crusade. So he's documented here, and he holds the flag of the Crusades. And then we have the aristocrats who commissioned this Madonna, and you see this emblem here. Now, what's really interesting is we don't have any other ecclesiastical architecture in the realm of this painting. But of course, if I asked you, and sometimes I apologize, it's a little harder at Zoom, but what is so unique about it? Well, of course, it's this towering throne that the Madonna is seated. Sometimes in our very own Timken Museum, we have a beautiful Sienese altarpiece where the Madonna is sitting on the floor. And we call that the Madonna of Humility because she's on the floor. And then we have variations of her on a throne-like setting. But this is remarkable. This is a high throne that takes up so much of the space. She has this scarlet garment, and she holds the baby Jesus, who we don't see a lot of detail on the face, but we have St. Francis gesturing to us in 𝗔𝗥𝗧𝗦𝗥𝗲. We have a very beautiful parquet type floor. And that's another thing that the Venetian Renaissance is known for, lots of patterning in textiles, carpets, floors. You can see this beautiful, looks like almost Eastern style carpet or long train. And again, just to remind you that the Venetians, because of their location on the Adriatic and their maritime strength, they were trading in North America, North Africa, and going far reaches of the known world. So we see a lot of influence from those places. We also have a castle and a little bit of landscape here. We always see a bit of perspective with these two figures here. So this is an idea of how Giorgione is incorporating his lessons from Bellini and taking it a bit further. Now, it's very sad about Giorgione's life because he lived a very short life. He died at about 32 or 33. So his career was truncated by the plague. And one thing I do want to tell you, as I mentioned, this is the golden age of Venetian painting, the Cinquecento, beginning around 1501, as I just showed you. But about 1575, things really are kind of decimated in Venice because the plague really is raging. So you have to remember, and we've talked about this when I talked about Sienese Renaissance, the plague didn't just stop in the 14th century. It resurged in the 15th century, in the 16th century. So it was always an issue. But we'll go back. The Tempest, this painting is one of the most magnificent paintings in Venetian Renaissance. And what does it talk about? It is very enigmatic. In fact, Lord Byron, the great poet, once said this to him is the most beautiful enigmatic painting in all of Western art. So what do we have here? What we have is a woman seated and she's nursing a child, and she has a very unusual posture because she has sort of an open area here where of nudity, which is not usually seen quite like that. And she looks at us a little bit with mystery. Some people think it was a gypsy woman. Some people think it was actually a portrait of Giorgione himself looking at unrequited love. So a rather allegorical reference to unrequited love. Or it could be just a soldier guarding her. At one time, this soldier was actually a woman, and it was repainted in, I believe, the 19th century. But here in this original image, we have a soldier in the contrapposta pose. You also see in Greco-Roman sculpture where the shifted weight. We have this exquisite blue aquamarine color. And again, it emphasizes how important, how crucial color was for these artists. And also light. We have this really subtle, beautiful light as it surrounds her. We have the water, remember, lagoons, waterways, symbol of Venice. And also, well, we'll talk about the symbols of Venice in just a second, but we have this swirling sky. Well, a tempest is a storm. And later, about 100 years later, Shakespeare made it very profoundly interesting in his play by the same name. But a tempest is a storm that's brewing, and we see that the clouds are filled with light, and again, they're sort of swirling. The trees bend a little bit, so wind is part of this. And we have this very natural depiction of these trees and this architectural element. Now, Venice was a great city for architecture. Remember Palladio, San Savino, amazing city of architecture, the palaces, the palazzos. But so we always see this kind of incorporation of architectural elements. And we also have this cupola here. So the water in the middle ground, the sky in the background, and these two figures. Now, it was never 100% determined the true meaning of this painting, the enigmatic quality of it. But that enhances its beauty and mystery. So we're moving on. All right, Giorgione. Giorgione creates really one of the first erotic, mythological, and pastoral paintings in all of Western art. So this is perhaps the #1 first sleeping Venus. Now, there's a lot to talk about. First of all, Giorgione dies in 1510, very unfortunately. And Titian, who studied with Bellini and Giorgione, particularly with Giorgione, did complete the landscape here. Because like Titian, these artists, the Bellini family, Giorgione, they ran large workshops for artists or were involved with them. That was really prominent in Venice. And so this landscape was finished by his successor and student Titian. So what do we have here? We have an exquisite sleeping Venus. It is probably a marriage portrait where the face of this Venus from Greek mythology, Greco-Roman mythology, is probably the face of the woman who was the betrothed. So an aristocrat had this painting commissioned. What is so unique about this painting is it's so subtle and beautiful. And it is not, she is very quiet and serene and beautiful. And although there is a little bit of eroticism around, it's quiet, it's dreamlike. What is so exquisite here is look at this with this chiaroscuro, how the light falls on the folds of this white satin or cotton or linen sheet here. It's so beautiful. It's so subtle. And look how the hillside mirrors the elongation of her body. Now she is dreaming. And what it was said that Giorgione actually was dreaming of this. So in other words, he dreamed the dream of this beautiful woman who is Venus, but with the face of a betrothed Venetian aristocrat. So it is very unique. And now we have, again, this magnificent landscape. And here we have a more rural setting rather than a palazzo or cathedral. We have a more rural setting, more of a town. And she sleeps in the great outdoors. And again, as I mentioned, the Venetians were so adept at creating the folds of fabric, the beauty of the color, this little ornate patterning, this little field of flowers. And so we can see this as such an inspiration to later artists who depict the reclining nude. For example, if we look at the work of Manet, and we look at the work of Renoir, and we look at the work of many other subsequent artists, we see how much this influenced Western art. Now, time is of the essence, so I will move on, and I will compare it to a work by Titian. So here this is done 24 years later, and it's quite different. But of course, you can see the influence. And I do want, sometimes it's so nice in art history to do a comparison, a side by side. But because of the rich nature of this subject, I had to kind of do it in a more linear manner. And so we'll continue. I apologize, we went a little too far. So the Venus of Urbino, why is it called that? Well, the Duke of Urbino commissioned, he was married, he was betrothed to Juliana, this beautiful aristocratic woman. And so this was a gift and a manner of instruction for his upcoming bride. Now, pardon me, you can actually see very much the influence of his teacher Giorgione in this picture. But what is unique about it? There's several things that are unique about it. First of all, it's an interior reclining woman rather than in a natural setting. So we have this palazzo. And if you go to Venice, and I hope you have or will, it's filled with these magnificent palazzo that were on the canals and just filled with art and masterpieces of architecture. And so you can see elements of that. You can see this detailed floor. You can see the tapestry and a beautiful night scene from a window. One thing a lot of these Venetian artists enjoy doing were nightscapes, particularly when we look at the work of, for example, Lorenzo Lotto, who we'll look at a little bit later. He loved painting nightscapes. And then we look at the Venus herself. So again, Venus, the goddess of love and beauty, is having the face of the Venetian aristocratic woman. This was said to be an instructional painting. It is not erotic, like this is a concubine. It's not like that at all. It's really to celebrate the beauty of love between a man and a woman in the marriage arrangement. And it was said to show her how, to love and honor your spouse. So we have a dog that represents fidelity. And I've talked about this before. Think about the name Fido. Well, Fido came from this idea of fidelity. And then we have the posies. She holds a bouquet of posies, which represents love. Now, we also have this canzone. A canzone was a marital chest, like a hope chest, and it was filled with objects for the marriage, but it also relates to the love of children and home. So that's a representation here. And then we have her ladies in waiting, looking in searching for something in the canzone. And again, we have her body along, mirroring the line of this reclining nude, and these very detailed pillows and the beautiful fabric and the light, the chiaroscuro, it falls on her face. And remember, Caravaggio was very instrumental in teaching these artists about light. Sorry, I totally wrong on that when Caravaggio came much later. I don't even know what I'm talking about. I'm that so sorry. No, the Dutch artists were very important in the understanding of light. And many of these Venetian artists did look at these Dutch and Flemish artists. But because of time, again, we will go on. Oh, one other thing, you see this elaborate headdress, the braids, and the pearls of the highborn, because again, Venice was a very wealthy city. Now, Titian did a really interesting painting, Sacred and Profane Love, and probably one of the most iconic paintings in all of Venetian art. This was done when he was very young, 15, 14. And the reason why I say that, even though it's a profoundly beautiful painting, you can see there's a little bit of issue here. And I'm going to point out the issues before I talk about the beauty of this painting. What we have is Sacred and Profane Love. This is profane, meaning earthly, and sacred is here with the undressed figure. Now, if you look closely, the faces are actually mirrored. So we think that was actually, again, the mirror of two faces. And also this might have been also a marriage portrait. Now, what is sort of off about this painting is, excuse me, is the manner in which this profane woman is seated. If you look, her body is very truncated. It's almost compressed, and she doesn't even seem to be sitting appropriately on the sarcophagus. Now, this figure does. It sits firmly on this sarcophagus, but her figure almost looks slumping. Is she seated on the edge? Is she sitting on something else? So that is probably, as art historians would attribute it to, maybe his emerging ability. He lived to a very old age, and he was young when he did this. But there's some magnificent qualities to this painting, and I don't mean to diminish his brilliance as an artist. I just wanted to show you that artists do evolve, and even great artists like Titian will show his evolution. Okay, what is the topic? Okay, so we said this is Sacred and Profane Love, and so the earthly and spiritual love. We have this sarcophagus, but it's not exactly a sarcophagus because the lips of the form are too wide. You wouldn't really see that. And also we have an interesting body of water here. Remember, again, the lagoons and the canals, and we have a spout in probably bronze, and it's rather phallic. And again, this is related to love and eroticism. And then we have a little putti, and he's playing in the water, little cherub. And then we have this magnificent landscape, and it has some meaning here. So when you think about rabbits, rabbits relate to fecundity. And we also have some hunting here on the right-hand side. And we have this very detailed bas-relief. And it's been debated, what is the subject of this bas-relief? Some people think it's a slaying from the Bible, from the Old Testament. It could be mythological. That is not 100% determined, but we do have this bas-relief, and we do have this magnificent landscape, and again, this light falling on the figures. And it does relate to this understanding of love and its importance, its mythological heritage, but also, again, these marriage portraits that were often done by these Venetian aristocrats. And this interest in landscape. You know, when you look at the work of Giorgione and Bellini, they really were bringing in landscape at a very early time. Now, of course, so was Leonardo da Vinci. If you think about the Mona Lisa, which was done about 10 years prior to this, Florentine and Roman artists were also, particularly the Florentine and the Venetian, were bringing in the landscape as components of these paintings, and then it often becomes almost more important. When you think about that Giorgione, the one prior, we'll just look at this again, the Tempest, you can see that landscape is so prominent in these paintings. So you will see more and more of that as we move along. Now, I do want to, for sake of time, go into some of the religious aspects of Titian's paintings, because this is probably one of the most beautiful paintings in all of Christian art. It was meant for a church, and it is so massive, 22 feet high. And it was so massive, it was meant to be placed in the back of a church. So it shows Titian's extreme talent. So he could do portraiture. He did amazing portraits. Even his own self-portraits were incredible. He does brilliant landscapes and mythological paintings, but his religious paintings are also profound. Why is this such a remarkable painting? Well, let's talk about it. This is not a static painting, as you would have seen in the Renaissance earlier. This painting has movement and depth and emotion. This is the Virgin Mary ascending to heaven. It is her time. And some of the prophets and her followers, like Peter, are waiting. They don't want her to leave the earth. They're calling for her. They're reaching up to her, and praying that she'll stay. But she knows her time is coming, and she will greet God as he overlooks her. Now look how he forms a triangle, how Titian magnificently forms this triangle that goes from the prophets and followers to the Madonna and up to God, swirling over her. And we have all these little putti or cherubs. Puttis or cherubs were related not only to Venus, like Cupid, the little flying, quote, angels, but they are also found in Christian iconography. So they were like baby angels, and they're swirling, and they seem to be holding up the clouds as she ascends to heaven. So this is profoundly brilliant. Look at how it's set in this niche, and it can be seen from the back of this large church or small cathedral, and it really brings emotion and power to a religious subject matter. Now, I do want to go on, I'm sorry, because we have so much to look at. Okay, the Rape of Europa. And again, as I mentioned, there are so many mythological, allegorical references in Titian's Ove. And he was the greatest Venetian painter. And this is just such a remarkable painting. So the Rape of Europa goes like this. If you know about Zeus, Jupiter as he is called in Roman mythology, he was a carouser. And he liked to escape his wife Hera, or Juno, and depending on Greek or Roman, and he would transform himself into other forms. For example, he would transform himself into a rain of gold coins, or he would transform himself into a deer or a bull. Well, here he's transformed himself into a bull. And he is carrying away the beautiful Europa. And unlike what is perceived earlier, she is a bit of a willing participant. And I hate to say in this time of the Me Too movement, it doesn't really resonate with us now, but she is kind of anticipating the tryst that will occur with the bull. But look how the bull looks us square in the eyes. And this image really captivated Picasso. He copied this image in his own way. He was just captivated by this idea of strength and power, and he looks directly at us. Now, we have a bit of a humorous aspect to this painting because we have a little puto, a little cherub, and he rides what is supposed to be a dolphin, but of course it looks like a scaly fish, and he's mocking this liaison. And we also have the cherubs or putti hovering over the arrows of slinging the arrows. Cupid slings the arrow for his mother. And we have her ladies in waiting are just kind of aghast, like, what is happening? She's been abducted. And then we have the swirling sky in this light-filled lagoon. Again, Venice was a lagoon. And we also know about the light and color. And you also see the little bit of tumultuous look about the clouds. They look like they are about to maybe rain. And so there's a hint or indication that the relationship here will not really be quite as smooth. So there might be some tension in the whole scene. Now, there is some allegorical reference. Some people say that this painting relates to what is happening in Venice at this time, because throughout the Cinquecento, there was a lot of issues with the Pope and the papacy, and how Venice retained its own sort of cultural, religious, economic structure. And the papal states, they were kind of angry with Venice, and they actually tried to create a battle, a war. There was a lot of infighting, and you'll see it at the end when we look at Veronese's painting, The Triumph of Venice. But Venice prevailed. Venice did prevail and maintained its structure and power. Although power did wane close to the end of the century, and particularly, as I said, because of plague. Now, we have a magnificent Venetian painting in the Timken. This is by Cevaldo. Now, Cevaldo was tangentially related to Venetian painting, but I did want to show this because, of course, it's a magnificent painting and it is part of our collection. Cevaldo did study in other parts of Northern Europe, but he did spend a great deal of time in Venice. He married a Flemish woman, and he was very interested in the work of Hieronymus Bosch. So he was connected to the Flemish school, but he married a Flemish woman, but he did live and practice quite a bit in Venice. Now, Cevaldo paints the Torment of St. Anthony. And well, let's talk about it. This is almost a bifurcated painting. We have what is probably the Tower of Babel, creating almost a diptych, a two-panel, although this is one painting. It's almost like two paintings. And we have good and we have evil. And we have St. Anthony, who was the originator of the monastic order. So we have him fleeing to a monastery where goodness and light will prevail. And he has his hands in prayer. And we have this beautiful white scarf that sort of leads us away and heads us toward this scene of hell and damnation. Now, what do we see here? As I mentioned, hell and damnation, but it also references evil, and it also represents the pervasiveness, ubiquitous nature of the plague as it goes through Europe. So the plague is never far away, and it is a history of plague, as I mentioned, Siena and other parts of Italy. Now, here we have direct, I mean literally direct quotes from Hieronymus Bosch's The Last Judgment. and a few perhaps of, well, let's just concentrate on the Last Judgment. The Last Judgment of Bosch is a remarkable painting, and you can see it in the 𝗔𝗥𝗧𝗦𝗥𝗲 Museum, and I hope I pronounced that correctly, in the wonderful city of in Belgium today, which is Bruges. And Bruges has an amazing museum with these early Netherlandish painters. And so Sebald was very aware of these Netherlandish greats like Bosch, and he quotes him here, these figures. And then we have in the central panel a boat. And it is my supposition that the boat represents the ship of fools, because in this time period, in the Cinquecento and earlier, they did not know how to deal with mental illness. So many times individuals were put on boats and they were sent out into the sea to fend for themselves. So that's probably a sort of a hellish concept. So we have good prevailing over evil, St. Anthony fleeing to the monastic order, and we also have this idea of salvation. Now, lastly, Sebald sometimes himself suffered from sort of difficult dreams, and it was said that St. Anthony, who was a patron saint of this thing called St. Vitus dance, which is related in some degree to epilepsy. So there was also this idea of dreams and seizures, and that also can be found in these swirling walls and fire. An amazing painting, and you can see it in the Timken when we reopen. Now, Giovanni Sebald also did amazing figurative paintings, and this is in the Getty Museum up in Los Angeles, so I hope you've seen it. And I don't have a lot of information on it, but I will tell you, I think it's magnificent. It just kind of takes my breath away. This exquisite figure development. Now, as I mentioned, Sebald was interested in Flemish, Netherlandish painting. So he does look at genre painting of the Dutch and Flemish school. He also shows his interest in rural setting, this idea of the beauty in a rural setting and the importance of music. So we have a flute, we have this beautiful countryside, and then the images of a village. So it is important for you to note that Sebald quite remarkably captured the figurative in art. So again, for time's sake, I'm going to have to go on. Now, we're going to look at really quickly another artist who was tangentially related to the Venetian school. He wasn't one of the most profoundly great like Titian and Bellini, Giorgione, and Veronese, but he was important, and he did spend some of his time in Venice. And we have a beautiful Veneto, which I'm going to show you really quickly, but he was known to be a really important portrait painter for the Venetian aristocracy. Now, very little is known about this painting, but I just want to make a real quick comparison because you're going to look at one of the paintings in the Timken. But look, he has a fur collar and a gilded sword and an elaborate shirt or blouse, as it were, and then this very distinct style. And then, of course, this landscape. So I just wanted to kind of use it as a comparison, but we're going to go quickly into our very own Veneto. So this is a portrait of a young lady in a green dress, and it's one of our beautiful portraits at the museum. What's significant about this painting is we think it is one of the ladies in waiting to Isabella d'Este, and she was a prominent part of the royal, the aristocracy of Venice, and it was a commissioned portrait. However, there's been thoughts that she might have been painted posthumously, that she actually died young. But let's talk about how the Venetians showed off their great wealth. As I told you, Venice was one of the wealthiest cities at that time, the Cinquecento, and she has an amazingly elaborate costume with this very beautiful headdress, elaborately woven. We see that she has beads of lapis that is supposed to sort of mirror the color of her eyes. We have these removable sleeves with satin coming through. We have the falconeering gloves. Now, again, that's another debatable issue because it was originally said that, the aristocrats practiced falconeering. But the problem is the hands are switched. So whether it's just thick gloves or whether these are actually falconeering gloves, makes more sense for the falconeering. Now, she looks at us rather unhappily. And I've mentioned this 100 times, but I always enjoy saying this. Teeth were a real issue. So even if they were an aristocrat, they often had their mouth closed. There's a little cartolino here, which is a signature of the artist, this amazing crimson background, and an elaborate, profoundly beautiful portrait of a young woman. I'm going to go on because we don't have a lot of time. So Lorenzo Lotto was also an important Venetian artist. He was kind of a strange guy. He mimicked all kinds of works by, he looked at all kinds of artists, Michelangelo, and he kind of did these composite images. He also shows, because of the time period, he's showing his influence and interest in mannerism. Remember, mannerism is more elongated, perspective is a little different, and so it's kind of a move away from just classical Renaissance art. So quickly, this is a very humorous painting. So we have little Cupid, and he's staring at his mom with the myrtle wreath, and myrtle was the crown of the goddess Venus. Sometimes you see the gods and goddesses with laurel or myrtle, and he's urinating right here through, jokingly, on his mother, and it's meant to symbolize fertility. And we have the beautiful little wings, the color, her exquisite form. And again, this was a bridal portrait. So the face of this Venus was commissioned as a portrait of his bride, whoever this was, and I don't recall. Now we have a couple of elements just to remind us. We have the snake that represents jealousy. We have a conch shell that represents the female's strength and fertility. And we have her elaborate bridal headdress embellished with all manner of gemstone and the beautiful exquisite earrings. So this is a very humorous painting and indicating sort of the frivolity that was found in some of the Venetian art. And then we have, of course, Rose's Love and Beauty. Now, again, for time's sake, I'm going to have to go on. Lorenzo Lotto, as I mentioned, was, he painted a lot of different subjects, some humorous and some religious. He painted at the Vatican. He too was very influenced by Bellini, and he did some papal portraits, or at least some papal imagery. But look at this adoration of the shepherds. And because we're kind of running out of time, I'm just going to go through this really quickly. The face is crowded, and we have her in prayer with this ring. This is actually the ring of like the Holy Family. We have these two figures, these two shepherds who are actually the two men, the two aristocrats who commissioned this painting. And so the scene is very crowded. And talk about chiaroscuro, this beautiful Venetian light that, of course, taken up 75 years later with the work of Caravaggio and the Baroque artists. Now, they look on this scene and we see the welcoming of the baby Jesus, and we have the Lamb of God, Agnus Dei. And we talked about that last time in Spanish Baroque, because the Lamb of God. And here the Lamb is alive to welcome the baby. But in subsequent paintings, for example, in the Baroque, we see at Agnus Dei the sacrifice of Jesus. And of course, she's always, the Madonna, always in this beautiful red and blue crimson. You can see the saturated color. And Lotto loved night painting. He did a lot of night paintings, and you can see that here as a sky emerges. Now, again, because we don't have a lot of time, I'm going to go to this Tintoretto. Tintoretto was also an important Venetian artist, maybe not quite as significant as Titian, because sort of in later life, his prestige diminished a bit, and kind of like Lotto, because Lorenzo Lotto was a very difficult person. He didn't really have a lot of success and was a difficult person to be around. So we don't hear quite as much, but not to say that Tintoretto wasn't an important artist. So let's talk about this really quickly. Susanna and the Elders. It is a story from the book of Daniel in the Old Testament. And Susanna usually had her bath on a daily basis, and she would have her attendants helping her bathe in this, of course, is reminiscent of Venice and the lagoons and the waterways. And she has her mirror and her objects that are really pure, rings and pearls, purity. And she's bathing and she's unaware of some really sinister things that are happening. So this comes from the book of Daniel in the Old Testament. And her husband, 𝗔𝗥𝗧𝗦𝗥𝗲, was married to her, and he was visited by these two elderly men. Well, these two elderly men broke away from 𝗔𝗥𝗧𝗦𝗥𝗲 and came to spy on this beautiful woman that was his wife, Susanna. And she's unaware. And it is horrendous, the story, because what these two characters plot is to abduct her or rape her. So she's unaware, and they're plotting, how do we get to her? And what we have is really interesting because we have two distinct parts of this painting. This part is a landscape with a deer, and we have a magpie, and the deer is believed relates to fertility, and the magpie is bearing false witness. Because what these two characters do, one is placed between this caryatid figure, this arch here, and this represents the lagoon too of Venice here, and it's a magnificent landscape. We also have these roses, which are kind of lust, and these two plot to abduct her, but what happens is she refuses their sexual overtures, and they bear false witness against her, and they tell her husband, you know, she was cavorting with this young man, and so you should put her to death, because that kind of behavior was put to death in ancient times. Well, Daniel, who is an important figure in the Old Testament, had a dream, and the dream said, don't let this woman go to death. She's going to be put to death. You have to stand up. You have to protect her. And he does. He prevails upon the court. What would these men be doing? Why would she be with other people? This is a lie. Please, please reevaluate. And they do, and the judges do, and she escapes death. But it's about lust and greed and standing up for what one believes in. But look how magnificently beautiful she is. She was considered the most beautiful woman of her time, her ornate hair, her drop pearl earrings. And I wish I could talk about it a little longer, but we just are running out of time. And just really quickly, Tintoretto also not only painted, he painted a lot of biblical scenes and some mythological, but the deliverance of ARTSReach is from the story of Ptolemy the 12th, who was a ruler of Egypt, had two daughters, and well, actually, Cleopatra was her half sister, and she took over for ARTSReach when Cleopatra welcomed Caesar into Egypt. So she is forced, ARTSReach is forced to flee, and here she is on this boat that looks like it's about ready to capsize. We definitely see this aspect of mannerism that's really pervasive. Many mannerist artists left Rome with the sack of Rome and went to other regions, and so mannerism spread. So it's distorted figures. Look at these elongated bodies, this compacted space and perspective, and it's just very swirling waves. And we just have one or two more. I just want to touch upon them. Here we have Christ at the Sea of Galilee. And I'm actually going to just really, this is very much a mannerist painting, very Tintoretto, very manneristic, because you can see the colors are a little bit strange. It shows the influence of El Greco, who was living in Venice later. You can see this kind of, that El Greco was influenced by this. And then we're going to go really quickly to Veronese, because we haven't had much time. I just want to show you, we're almost out of time. But Veronese, the wisdom of strength, he shows how wisdom looks up to light. You can see the light here. We have strength of Hercules, but strength looks down, and it's much more plebeian, whereas wisdom looks up for spiritual guidance. Strength is more base and it looks down. And so it is an allegorical reference. Quickly, we're going to look at, he was a wonderful portrait painter, this aristocrat with a massively beautiful dog, an elaborate costume. This was a commissioned portrait. We have now, this is the painting I really want to spend 1 minute talking about, because I see our time is just about up, but the Apotheosis of Venice is the triumph of Venice over the Papal States and wresting control over the papacy and other city-states that tried to take over Venice. So we have Venice as the Venus, and she's ascending to heaven. We have the rape of Europa down here. We have the Lion of Venice here. And this was and we have these pilasters and all this architecture and the swirling imagery. So this is one of the most important religious, and it's religious in its allegorical reference, but it really shows the triumph of Venice over its adversaries. Because also around this time too, we had Turkey. The Turkish Sultan Suleiman was trying to also, the Ottoman Empire was trying to take over Venice as well, because it's where it's situated. So we have Venice really being, let's say, stressed on all sides, not only by the church, but by some of the city-states. And it did, and Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, there was a lot in Venice that was happening to put it on edge. And then the last painting I just will show you is this flight into Egypt. And I just really quickly, we will see that there's some remarkable imagery here. We have, remember, Mary is told, Mary and Joseph, you've got to, Herod is going to kill you, you better leave. So they're fleeing. We have these sort of characters that you might have seen in Netherlandish painting. We have this angel. It's so surreal. It's almost otherworldly. And then she points to this tree, a spiritual tree, and they're fleeing this countryside and this rural setting. And it's a very condensed space. So you see the remarkable variation in Venetian painting with these incredible masters. Now, if I see that we're over time, but if somebody has a question, which I really love questions, and Samantha is really great at directing us to those. So Samantha, could you take it away?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Karen. What a fantastic presentation. There is actually a question from our Facebook from Saeed asking, what is the meaning of pietà from all the way at the beginning of the presentation? Can it be made in any medium? I thought it was only in stone.
Oh, that's a really interesting question. Yes, the Pietà, because you're thinking of Michelangelo's Pietà, which is so remarkable. But no, it was captured in other mediums. So of course, this painting, this great painting, profoundly beautiful, this idea of compassion and pity. But no, it was directed into many different directions. Multiple media captured this really important subject matter.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Karen. And Pietà, like, usually refers to the, Mary holding the Christ.
In that Bellini painting, it is said that actually life stopped for that moment. The way he painted it, it was so profound that the world was actually stopping.
Yeah.
And you saw that in Bellini's painting.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous one. Well, thank you so much for that question from Facebook. And I see lots of thank you in the chat from Olga and Annette for such an interesting talk and for sending them down some Google rabbit holes. So I think that's a great thing for, further research. So thank you again, Karen, and thank you so much for the kind comments from everyone on Zoom. But before I let you all go, I'll just remind you guys that this presentation, as well as previous ones, again, as I had said, been recorded and placed on our social media channels. So you can check those out if you would like, and kind of see other presentations done by the Timken. You can also find any information for future tours on the Timken website. So if you have, would like to know any information for future tours, for tomorrow's tour at 11, please, check out our website for information for those. But again, thank you so much, Karen, for such an interesting presentation, and thank you everyone for joining us this morning. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Samantha, and thank you for all visitors. I encourage you to attend these ARTSReach lectures. I really enjoy having as many people and as many questions too. So have a good day, everyone, and see you next month.